Part 1. I am well pleased not to have the Empire's cares. In 1494, the French invaded Italy, chasing a dynastic claim on the Kingdom of Naples. Over the next 25 years, Italy became a war zone. France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire all fought to gain power there. Italian states like Naples, Milan, Florence, Venice, and the papacy had to pick sides. In 1503, the Spanish used new pike and shot tactics to win at Ceresole and took over Naples. In 1515, France won a major battle at Marignano, and King Francis I became the Duke of Milan. In 1516, Francis made peace with Spain by signing the Treaty of Noyon with King Charles I. The Italian wars were over at last. On January 12, 1519, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I died at age 59. After his death, his grandson Charles I became Archduke of Austria. However, Charles still needed votes from 7 prince-electors in the empire to become emperor. Francis also wanted the title. France was now surrounded by a ring of Habsburg dominions, limiting expansion and growth in Europe. Becoming emperor would help reduce this threat. Francis and Charles did not fight with armies. Instead, they spent hundreds of thousands and made deals bribing the 7 electors. Charles specifically sourced 2/3 of his budget from the Fugger banking family in Augsburg. King Henry VIII of England also showed interest in the election too, but dropped out early because the campaign cost too much. Pope Leo X even showed public support for Francis, but deep down, he knew Francis did not have a chance. The German princes wanted a ruler from a German family, which Charles was. It did not help Francis that some electors gave him false promises, and that his diplomats believed them and gave Francis false hope. On June 8, 1519, the electors gathered in Frankfurt and voted unanimously for Charles, who now became Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Francis was obviously displeased with the results of the election. He sent troops to Navarre to pressure Spain, but they were defeated at Noailles in June 1521. Francis also talked to Pope Leo X, whom he did not trust. In Italy, Leo wanted the cities of Parma and Piacenza back from France, which made things difficult. In May 1521, Leo made a new deal with Charles V instead. They agreed to push France out of Italy and make Francesco II Sforza the Duke of Milan. Charles V and Leo also faced a bigger problem. In 1517, a monk named Martin Luther spoke out against corruption in the Catholic Church. By 1520, he grew his ideas into a new movement that split the church in two. Leo, as pope, had to defend church authority. Charles, as emperor, also had to stop this new Protestant movement rising in the empire. To take Milan from France, a large Spanish and papal army gathered near Parma under Prospero Colonna. France had weak support from Venice and the Swiss. The French commander, Odet de Foix, the Viscount of Lautrec, could not pay his Swiss mercenaries, so many deserted. Lautrec was helpless in preventing Milan's fall in November. Leo felt pleased when he heard the news. That same night, he got a fever and died a few days later on December 1st. After his death, Leo's cousin, Giulio de' Medici, wanted the role but many feared this would make the papacy seem like a family position. In the end, the cardinals chose a compromise: Adrian VI, a Dutch cardinal who had never been to Italy. Soon after he arrived in Rome, a plague began, which people saw as a bad sign. The year 1522 opened with 16,000 Swiss troops marching into Lombardy, honoring a deal they had made with the French. With help from Venice, the French reached Milan in March and trapped the Imperial army inside. Lautrec chose to weaken the city by cutting off food and water. Francesco II's Forza then led about 6,000 German troops toward Milan. When the French redirected some troops to attack Novara, he took his chance and entered Milan on April 2nd. Lautrec then moved to attack Pavia, south of Milan, but heavy rain forced him towards Monza. Colonna followed and chose a strong defensive spot north of Milan at Bicocca, complete with marshes and streams. At this point, the Swiss troops grew restless because they had not been paid. They warned Lautrec they would soon leave, but not before fighting a final battle. On April 27th, the French army moved on Bicocca. The French planned to open with artillery, but the Swiss charged too early and uphill, straight into heavy gunfire. At the same time, the French cavalry tried to attack from the side. Rough ground slowed them, and Imperial forces drove them back. Imperial losses were light, whereas the Swiss lost 3,000 in the span of half an hour. The Battle of Bicocca destroyed the battlefield dominance Swiss infantry and pikemen had enjoyed since the 14th century, as gunpowder weaponry and pike and shot tactics were now here to stay. King Henry VIII chose the side that looked the strongest, and after Bicocca, that side was Charles. The two met and agreed to invade France in May 1523. Already, however, English troops were burning land, attacking towns, and trying to take areas near Calais, England's last holding in mainland Europe. Francis left his mother, Louise of Savoy, in charge of France while he marched to Italy. At the same time, one of his nobles, Charles III, the Duke of Bourbon, turned against him. Bourbon owned large lands in France, had his own army, and also had a better claim to the throne than Francis, which caused tension. After Bourbon's wife died in 1521, Louise tried to take his lands, and even tried to marry him to gain power. Legal battles began, making Bourbon angry and causing him to secretly defect to Charles in 1523. When Francis confronted him, Bourbon fled and was branded a traitor. The same year, France attacked Italy again, taking towns near the Ticino River. The French crossed the river and moved toward Milan, but chose to wait. This delay caused food to run low and spread disease, ultimately resulting in the unpaid troops retreating months later. In January 1524, Imperial forces struck back. Fernando de Avalos, the Marquess of Pescara, led a surprise night attack and captured Roberto, Vigevano, and Garlasco. French forces fell back to Switzerland. On April 30th, both sides fought near the Sesia River, where Imperial troops used feigned retreats and gunfire to secure victory. The French retreat gave the Imperial army another chance to attack. In July, Bourbon and Pescara invaded southern France, aiming for the port of Marseille. After several failed attacks in September, they gave up and left on the 28th, returning to Italy. Francis responded with a new invasion, while Pescara moved toward Lodi, and Bourbon went toward Milan. When Bourbon reached Milan, he found the city weak and stricken by plague. Francis crossed the Ticino River, but avoided the deadly sickness in Milan. With about 28,000 soldiers, he marched south to Pavia instead. Inside the city, 6,000 tired, hungry, and unpaid Imperial troops, led by Antonio de Leyva, held the defense. In late November, the French broke parts of the walls and tried to attack, but Leyva held strong. So, Francis settled in for a long siege, and set up camp in a large walled park neighboring the city. Winter made life hard. Soldiers faced mud, cold, and disease. Francis still believed he would win, and even sent 6,000 troops south to take Naples, which made the siege stall. On February 24th, 1525, Pescara's army broke into the park at night and attacked at dawn. At first, Francis pushed back with a strong cavalry charge, but this move stopped his own cannons from firing. Hidden Spanish gunmen then opened fire at close range. The armor of the French knights were of no use. Francis fought hard, but was surrounded and captured. By midday, the destroyed French army lost about 15,000 men, while the Imperials lost a tenth of that. Part 2. Nothing remains to me but my honor and my life. Wrote Francis to his mother Louise, as he started getting accustomed to imprisonment in Madrid. His wounds were minor, but his pride suffered greatly. Charles did not celebrate much, as he believed he should not treat a victory over a fellow Christian as if it were a victory over an enemy of the faith. Charles decided to free Francis, but only if France gave up lands like Burgundy and his claims to Milan and Naples. Francis said he would rather die in prison, and he almost got his wish, as a serious illness debilitated him in September. Charles rushed to see him, and signed the Treaty of Madrid on January 14, 1526. In the treaty, Francis agreed to give up Burgundy, and claims in Artois, Flanders, and Italy. In return, he gained his freedom, agreed to marry Charles's sister Eleanor, and sent 2 sons as hostages. However, the moment he returned home, Francis tore up the treaty, as he believed deals made under pressure did not count. While Francis stayed in prison, a cardinal tried to entice Pescara with the throne of Naples, but Pescara secretly tattled to Charles. The cardinal then blamed Francesco Sforza, which gave Charles an excuse to take Milan for himself. Pescara died in December, which weakened the Spanish army. Meanwhile, Venice and Pope Clement VII feared Charles's growing power. In May 1526, they formed the League of Cognac with France, Florence, and Sforza. Their goal was to push Imperial forces out of Italy, and possibly take Naples if Charles refused peace. The League of Cognac started its war in June. By late summer, the League captured Lodi and Cremona and gained support from French troops. But then, the Colonna family, who supported Charles, attacked and looted parts of Rome. This scared Pope Clement VII, so he pulled his forces back. In northern Italy, Bourbon led a force of German troops. Many of these soldiers followed Lutheran beliefs, who disliked the Pope and hoped to gain loot, especially as they had not been paid. By early 1527, this army rebelled. Instead of going north, the army marched south like a large, loose group of bandits. When they reached Florence, people feared an attack, but the army kept moving. On May 5th, Bourbon and his mutinous army camped near Rome. He asked Clement VII for safe passage through the city so he could march to Naples, who refused. Early the next day, soldiers climbed the walls of the Borgia. When Bourbon was killed early on, the army pushed forward. They broke into the city and killed many defenders. Clement escaped to the Castel di San Angelo just in time. The soldiers began to loot Rome. They attacked everyone: men, women, children, locals, and foreigners. Protestant soldiers also attacked churches, broke sacred items, and mocked religious practices in the heart of the Catholic world. The city's rich cultural scene collapsed, and many Renaissance artists fled the violence to places like Florence and Venice. On June 5th, Clement agreed to harsh terms, including a large payment and hostages. The Imperial army in Rome refused to return to Lombardy. This forced Antonio de Leyva to defend his lands there alone. Despite believing he was outnumbered 4-1, Leyva secured a victory at Marignano and later at Monza. But then, his main supply route to Spain was cut when Andrea Doria, working for the French, captured Genoa in August. Without supplies, Leyva moved to Pavia in October and looted the city heavily. At the same time, Lautrec left Lombardy and marched south with 20,000 men. He aimed to defeat Clement in Rome, and then attack Naples, which he did beginning in April 1528. Andrea Doria led a naval blockade to cut off supplies to Naples, which the Spanish tried but failed to break. Life in the French camp grew worse over time, with flooding making conditions worse. Doria became unhappy and switched sides. Soon after, Lautrec fell sick and died in August. Without him, the French army fell apart and retreated in poor shape. In June 1529, after Leyva defeated another force at Ladriano, peace talks began. Charles wanted to focus on problems in Germany and needed Clement's support. They made a deal in Barcelona, where Charles promised to help the Medici family regain power in Florence. In return, Clement forgave past actions. Another peace deal followed at Cambrai in August. Francis gave up all claims in Italy, pulled out his army, and agreed to terms to free his son from Spain. Peace with France was secure at last, so Charles decided it was time to finally be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. He also had to follow the Treaty of Barcelona, which said Florence must return to Medici control. At the same time, trouble still existed in Naples, and the Ottoman Empire threatened Vienna. In August 1529, Charles landed in Genoa and met Clement in Bologna. They talked for months, mostly about Milan. By December, they agreed that Francesco Sforza would stay Duke, as Charles knew no one would accept him as Duke. On February 24th, 1530, the 5th anniversary of Pavia and his 30th birthday, Charles got his wish and was crowned by Clement, the last Holy Roman Emperor to do so. After he left Italy, the Italian states understood that Spain, not France, now held power. One big problem remained, however: Florence. The city had been under siege since October 1529 by the army of the Prince of Orange. The people of Florence stayed strong, and even Michelangelo helped design defenses. Fighting was regulated to small skirmishes outside of the city, focused on supply routes. In August 1530, a Florentine force under Francesco Ferruccio was annihilated at Gaviana, and the Prince of Orange was killed in the fighting. By this point, food was running scarce, and infighting began to affect the city government. On August 12th, Florence surrendered. In 1531, Charles made Alessandro de' Medici the first hereditary Duke of Florence. Like Rome, the city grew weaker and poorer, while Venice rose as the new center of the Renaissance. The Treaty of Cambrai brought a short period of peace after Florence fell. As part of the deal, Francis married Eleanor, even though he still loved his late wife, Claude. Almost immediately, Francis showed his disdain for Eleanor by openly cheating on her, reducing the marriage to something purely political. Eleanor's sole purpose was to be a link between her husband and her brother. At the same time, King Henry VIII faced his own marriage problems. He wanted to leave Catherine of Aragon, an aunt of Charles, because she had not given him a son. He fell in love with Anne Boleyn and asked Clement for a divorce. When he refused, Henry married Anne anyways in 1533, and passed laws that broke England away from the Catholic Church. He created the Church of England, and made himself its leader. Meanwhile, Francis arranged for his son Henry to marry Catherine de' Medici, a relative of Clement. Their wedding in Marseille in 1533 was large and full of parades, feasts, and dances. At this event, Francis suggested the unthinkable of allying with Sultan Suleiman of the Ottoman Empire, when Clement refused to support him. France already had trade links with the Ottomans, but no strong alliance. Francis now felt like the enemy of his enemy should be his friend. In 1533, Ottoman Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa brought gifts to France, agreeing on friendship and trade. Clement died in September 1534, succeeded by Pope Paul III. As Paul III was not eager to support France, the French grew closer to the Turks instead. Around the same time, Barbarossa captured Tunis, giving the Ottomans strong control in the Mediterranean. The year after, it fell to Spain. Part 3. New Friendships, New Dukes. In early November 1535, Francesco Sforza died without an heir. Because of this, Charles took direct control of Milan, and no one objected. Some advisors warned Charles that keeping Milan could anger Francis, but he kept it anyways, and waited to see what happened next. After Charles gained victories in Tunis and Milan, Francis feared Charles had become too powerful. Francis wanted his son Henry to rule Milan instead. But Henry, through Catherine de' Medici, had claims on Urbino, which could add to his power if he became duke. Charles tried to delay the issue by suggesting another son instead. But Francis wanted results, so he invaded Savoy in 1536 to strengthen French power in northern Italy. Francis claimed Savoy through his mother Louise, the half-sister of his uncle, Duke Charles III of Savoy. 20,000 French troops quickly captured Trieste and later Turin. Charles accused Francis of waging war without reason, and responded with his own invasion of both northern and southern France in July 1536. The French focused on the south, where Anne de Montmorency, Francis's top official, destroyed crops and supplies so the enemy could not use them, though the local peasantry were just as worse off. Disease spread among Charles's army, forcing him to retreat by September. Fighting continued in northern Italy for 2 more years. Control of the region kept shifting, as Charles allowed Federico Gonzaga, the Duke of Mantua, to claim the nearby region of Montferrat on behalf of his wife. In Florence, Alessandro de' Medici was assassinated in 1537, and Francis tried but failed to oust his successor, Cosimo de' Medici. Both sides struggled with low supplies, little money, and angry civilians. By June 1538, Francis and Charles signed the 10-year Truce of Nice. Once the Truce of Nice was signed, Francis made a surprising change. After years of fighting Charles, he tried to befriend him. His main advisor, Anne de Montmorency, pushed this new policy and guided foreign affairs. At the same time, France improved defenses in Turin and strengthened government control in Savoy and Piedmont to strengthen its position. Francis and Charles later met again at Aigues-Mortes. They greeted each other warmly, discussing royal marriages and plans against the Ottoman Empire. Francis also stopped helping Protestant rebels in Germany. This helped Charles restore order after several uprisings, including a revolt in Ghent in 1539 over heavy taxes. Charles faced a huge debt of £1,350,000 from growing his empire. He only earned around £233,000 a year, and spent nearly double that. His officials argued that Ghent owed him support because he was born there. Charles decided to travel through France to reach the Netherlands to subdue the revolt. Cities like Bordeaux, Poitiers, Orléans, and Paris held grand celebrations for him. Even then, deep disagreements simmered under the surface. Francis still wanted Milan, and Charles still refused to give it up. By 1540, the budding friendship had eroded. Many at the French court blamed Montmorency for the failed negotiations, and he soon lost influence in politics. In October, Charles invested his 13-year-old son Philip as Duke of Milan. After being shunned from the French court, Montmorency went to the wedding of Duke William of Jülich-Klevesburg and John d'Albret in 1541. A few years earlier, the Duke of Guelders died without children. His advisors gave his lands to Duke William, even though older treaties said Charles should inherit them. Charles could not react right away because he planned an attack on Algiers in North Africa, hoping to repeat his earlier victory at Tunis. Ottoman-backed pirates based there often attacked Spanish ships and ports. In 1541, Spanish forces landed at Algiers, but a huge storm wrecked ships, ruined weapons, and soaked supplies. Soldiers ran out of food, and even ate horses to stay alive. Thousands died. Francis saw Charles's failure as a chance to strike at Spain once more. He sent diplomats to Constantinople to renew Francis's alliance with the Ottoman Empire, but Spanish soldiers captured and killed them while returning to Lombardy. Charles tried to hide the crime, instead of punishing those responsible. Francis became furious when news eventually spread, and declared war on July 12, 1542. France attacked closer to home instead of focusing on Italy, invading Perpignan, Luxembourg, and Piedmont. In 1543, Barbarossa helped France capture the Savoyard city of Nice, though its fortress held out. Many people found it shocking that a Christian and Muslim Ottoman force were fighting together, which became even more scandalous when Francis forced most of the city of Toulon to leave their homes to house the large Turkish force for the winter. Back in Piedmont, Imperial troops took Mondovì and Carignano, cutting off French supply and communication lines. In response, Francis sent more soldiers under the Count of Enghien. Instead of attacking Carignano head-on, Enghien chose to trap the enemy there. When Imperial forces moved to support their allies, Enghien asked Francis for permission to fight a major battle. On April 14, 1544, about 14,000 men on each side met near Ceresole. The battle began with fighting between small groups of gunmen. In the center, Swiss troops charged forward, and French cavalry broke through German lines. On their left flank, Enghien led 2 cavalry charges that failed, and he feared defeat. But then, he learned the French had won in the center. Imperial troops started to retreat, and French and Swiss soldiers chased them. Many Imperial soldiers surrendered because they feared the Swiss, who showed little mercy. Around 6,000 Imperial troops died or suffered injuries, and another 3,000 became prisoners. After the victory, the French stayed nearby and forced towns such as Carignano to surrender. Even after the defeat at Ceresole, Charles gained ground elsewhere. In 1543, Imperial forces invaded Duke William's lands. They moved down the Rhine, captured Durrant after fierce fighting, and pushed other towns to surrender. On September 7th, Duke William surrendered and gave Charles control of Guelders, which strengthened the eastern border of the Spanish Netherlands. After taking over Guelders, Charles marched south to France. He attacked the town of Landrecies and hoped for a major battle. The French approached the town but suddenly withdrew, leaving Charles without his desired victory before winter came. Snowed in, Charles decided to be protective and allied with Henry VIII. Both planned to invade France with armies of 32,000 men each in 1544. Starting in May, Charles's army entered France through Champagne. Some towns surrendered fast, but the fortress at Saint-Dizier slowed the army down. The bastion used a new Italian star design with thick angled walls. This shape helped counter cannon fire and trapped attackers in deadly crossfire. Francis built many forts like this in northern France, but left the eastern border weaker, which Charles used to his advantage. Charles also built similar forts around Milan, the Netherlands, and Hungary. At the same time, Henry attacked northern France with Spanish forces, capturing Boulogne by September. This invasion forced Francis to move troops away from Italy and left Saint-Dizier without help, which fell on August 17th. Charles then marched deeper into France. His army burned villages, looted land, and faced little resistance. Before long, Charles stood only 70 kilometers from Paris, putting immense pressure on Francis to make peace. On September 18, 1544, they signed the Treaty of Crépy. Francis gave up claims in Italy and the Netherlands, while Charles dropped claims to Burgundy. Francis also had to put aside his alliance with the Turks, which angered Suleiman. Part 4. The War until Cateau-Cambrésis. Just a few days before the Treaty of Crépy was signed, Francis turned 50. He felt weak and sick from pain, infections, and older age. In 1546, Francois the Count of Enghien, the victor of Ceresole, died after a flying chest struck him during a mock battle. In January 1547, Henry VIII died at age 55, succeeded by his only living son, Edward VI. Many people felt that an old era was ending, and their fears grew stronger when Francis himself died on March 31st, 1547. His son, Henry II, became king on his 28th birthday. At the same time, Charles also struggled with poor health. He often lost weight during military campaigns and suffered from gout and other illnesses. Running his huge empire gave him great stress. Charles started giving many duties in Italy to his son Philip, the Duke of Milan. Charles wanted full loyalty, but Philip sometimes argued and delayed support because he believed war harmed the kingdom. Despite being King of France, Henry II was more akin to an Italian. He spoke Italian and relied on Italian allies, including his wife, Catherine de' Medici. He cared more about protecting borderlands such as Savoy and Piedmont than about conquering Milan or Naples. Powerful figures in the royal court, like the Guise brothers, pushed for bold moves, while others, like Montmorency, preferred caution. Henry found a way to strike back at Charles through Ottavio Farnese. Ottavio became Duke of Parma and Piacenza with help from his grandfather, Pope Paul III, and sought French support. In 1549, Paul III died, and Julius III allied with Charles. War had returned to Italy, although it was a proxy war. Fighting began around Parma and Mirandola in 1551. Armies attacked towns and ruined crops, but both sides lacked money and troops. By 1552, Julius III made peace with France, letting Ottavio keep Parma, and allowing French troops to stay nearby. Many people in Italy hated high taxes and harsh imperial rule. In Siena, anger rose after the local Spanish commander tried to build a fortress without approval. The people united against him and asked France for help. French agents tricked the commander into moving his garrison elsewhere, enabling Siena's militia to trap the Spanish inside the unfinished fortress. Duke Cosimo de' Medici intervened to help arrange peace terms. Still, Siena avoided promising loyalty to Charles, and continued being friendly to France. In 1554, Cosimo de' Medici prepared to conquer the city. Fighting spread across the countryside, often with extreme violence ordered by Cosimo. On August 2nd, Imperial forces crushed the French and Sienese army near Marciano. Siena was put under siege until it surrendered on April 21st, 1555. In exchange for getting rid of the debt they owed to Cosimo, the Spanish let him annex the city and its land in 1557, while keeping a few towns along the coast for themselves. Siena struggled to defend itself because its French soldiers had left to join the Turk in an attack on Corsica. France and the Ottomans both wanted to weaken Charles in the Mediterranean, but they used different ways to fight. Turkish corsair fleets often raided towns, stole goods, and captured people as slaves. France hoped local people would support them instead. These different approaches caused tension. In August 1552, a Turkish fleet launched a surprise night attack on the fleet of Andrea Doria in the Tyrrhenian Sea. In 1553, the Turkish admiral Dragut attacked parts of Italy and raided Elba. The fleet then joined the French and captured Corsica from Genoa. In September, forces attacked the town of Bonifacio, but Dragut left for good when he was not allowed to enslave the people. Later, Doria tried to retake Corsica. Fighting moved slowly, and many soldiers died from disease. By late 1554, Genoa had regained much of the island. France struggled because it lacked strong support and mistrusted local allies. A truce in 1556 froze the fighting, and by 1558, Genoa controlled Corsica again. Henry had declared war in September 1551. He backed partisan rebels against Charles and planned attacks in Lorraine and the Low Countries. France wanted Lorraine because it could cut Spanish supply routes between Flanders and Italy and open a path deeper into Germany. In April 1552, 35,000 French soldiers entered the area and quickly took Toul, Metz, and Verdun. In September, Charles answered with 55,000 troops. Like at Saint Dizier in 1544, Metz had very strong walls and defenses. The siege started late, so cold weather, sickness, and Charles's poor health hurt his army. His commanders broke parts of the walls, but feared a direct attack. Charles was forced to retreat when Henry attacked Artois and captured Hesdin. Another invasion through Picardy failed at Renty in August 1554. In 1555, Pope Paul IV became Pope. He hated Spanish control in Italy and wanted foreign armies gone, but he still saw France as less dangerous than Spain. Henry, however, accepted the 5-year Truce of Versailles in 1556. Around the same time, Charles finalized his abdications. Ruling an empire on which the sun never set had proven too stressful, so he divided the Habsburg Empire in two. His son, Philip II, was given Spain, the Low Countries, and all colonial dominions. On top of this, he was also King of England through his wife, Queen Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII. Charles's younger brother, Ferdinand, received the remaining Habsburg territories in the empire. Charles retired to a monastery in Spain, where he spent the rest of his days in pain until he died on September 21st, 1558, at age 58. Pope Paul IV did not like the Truce of Versailles, but he could not reject it in public. He pushed Henry to break it, and raised tensions in Rome by going after the pro-Spanish Colonna family. This angered Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the Duke of Alba. In September, Alba captured Ostia, Rome's main port, forcing a truce. Alba's invasion forced Henry to help Paul IV and break the Truce of Versailles. In January 1557, France sent an army led by Duke Francois of Guise. Guise wanted to invade Naples and planned to fight Alba, but his soldiers refused to march beyond Rome without pay. Henry then ordered Guise to end the campaign, and Paul made peace in September 1557. Up north, 5,000 Imperial troops under Duke Emmanuel Philibert of Savoy besieged St. Quentin in Picardy, and de Montmorency tried to sneakily enter the city, but was defeated on August 10th. The Spanish used a new unit of horsemen with pistols called Retiers, who could ride up to an enemy, take a pot shot, and quickly retreat. In 1558, Spain defeated France again at Gravelines in July, but not before England's last holding in France, Calais, was taken in January. By 1559, Henry had little money and feared growing Protestant ideas. On April 2nd, 1559, he signed the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. France kept gains in Calais and Lorraine, but gave up all claims in Italy. As a gesture of goodwill, Henry married his sister Margaret off to Duke Emmanuel Philibert, but the wedding was overshadowed by the news of a tragic jousting accident that Henry suffered while celebrating the treaty. He died on July 10, 1559, at age 40, and was succeeded by his sickly 15-year-old son, Francis II. The Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis ended more than 60 years of war in Italy. In 1494, when the war began, 5 powers ruled most of Italy: Milan, Florence, Venice, the Papacy, and Naples. By 1555, when the war ended, Spain directly controlled Milan and Naples, while Savoy and the Farnese family in Parma grew stronger. Some smaller states disappeared. Florence took Siena, the Pope gained Romagna, and Mantua inherited Montferrat. Foreign powers now had a permanent role in Italian affairs. Even so, many Italian states cared more about local problems and preserving their own power. Some Italians even preferred foreign rulers over nearby Italian rivals. At times, they joined alliances with foreign countries to advance their own interests. The wars badly hurt many parts of Italy, especially Lombardy and Piedmont. Armies ruined farms, sacked towns, disrupted trade, and forced people to flee. Still, some people gained wealth from the wars. Merchants sold food, clothes, and weapons to armies. Bankers in Genoa became rich by lending money for wars. Southern Italy saw fewer battles, but Spain burdened the region with heavy taxes to pay for war and coastal defense. There were some benefits, such as how the war spread Italian culture across Europe. Foreign soldiers and nobles admired Italian Renaissance art and architecture, and copied these ideas at home. Italian artists worked for foreign rulers, like how Leonardo da Vinci worked for Francis, and how Titian painted for Charles. Books like The Book of the Courtier and The Prince became famous across Europe, and shaped ideas about gentlemanly behavior and Machiavellian politics respectively. After 1559, peace did not last long. France soon entered the French Wars of Religion after the Guise brothers attacked Protestants at Vassy in 1562. In the Spanish Netherlands, conflict between Dutch Protestants and Spanish Catholic authorities led to the 80 Years' War beginning in 1568. In both of these conflicts, Italians played an important role. Spain ruled its Italian lands through local nobles and viceroys, and collaborated with the local aristocracy, who gained wealth and power in return. Milan, Naples, and Sicily supplied Spain with money, soldiers, ships, and supplies during wars. Over time, Spain depended heavily on Italian support, especially from Genoa. By the late 1500s, 60% of Spain's income went off to paying off its debts to Italian financiers. Spain ruled a huge global empire, but it relied heavily on Italians and many other foreign groups to keep that empire running.